Biological Health Threats and Vaccine Strategy and Chair of the EMA Pandemic Task Force, Dr. Fergus Sweeney, the Head of the Clinical Studies and Manufacturing Task Force, and Dr. Georgi Genov, the Head of Pharmacovigilance. Initially, Dr. Cavalieri will provide you with a short update on the most recent developments, and then we will have time for questions. Your microphone is disabled for the duration of this briefing and will be opened only for your question if you have raised your hand. As always, the briefing is broadcast via YouTube and Europe by satellite, and the footage can be used free of charge by all media, and you will find the respective links in the invite you received. To EMA's Head of Biological Health Threats and Vaccine Strategy, Dr. Cavalieri. Marco, please.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our second COVID-19 press briefing of this year. As only a week has passed since the last one, I will touch upon only a few important topics before leaving the floor for your questions. So, first of all, the epidemiological data from Europe is showing a growing number of cases of SARS-CoV-2 infections, which is largely driven by the rapid spread of the Omicron variant. The situation across the continent remains very concerning, especially in view of the high rate of infections that are progressing to disease and which are increasing the pressure on hospitals and primary care. While Omicron has shown a substantial ability to evade the immune responses elicited by vaccination, the currently approved COVID-19 vaccines continue to offer considerable protection from hospitalization and the severe forms of the disease, especially after the administration of a booster dose. According to the ECDC vaccine tracker, only 40% of the adult population has received a third dose of vaccine in the European Union and European Economic Area, and about 20% of the EU adult population is still not fully vaccinated with a primary series. Once again, we can only reiterate the importance for EU citizens to complete their primary vaccination with one of the vaccines authorized in the European Union, and for those who are eligible to get a booster shot as soon as possible and now. Last week, regulators from around the world have convened virtually under the umbrella of the International Coalition of Medicine Regulatory Authority, which is called ICMRA, to discuss the global regulatory response to the current Omicron wave. When looking at possible vaccination approaches against Omicron and other virus variants, the ICMRA members agreed that from a global perspective, the administration of multiple booster doses at short intervals would not be sustainable in the longer term. One of the reasons is that running large vaccination campaigns repeated times per year is challenging from the operational perspective and is expected to lead to social fatigue amongst citizens. In addition, there is at present not much experience with such an approach from dealing with other diseases, and therefore would be difficult to predict its impact overall. I would like also to take the opportunity to again clarify our current position on multiple booster doses. The repeated administration of boosters with very short interval might reduce the level of antibodies that can be produced at each administration, as our immune system needs a certain amount of time to mature the response to the antigens it is presented with, so potentially making the vaccination a little bit less efficient over time. If revaccinations would turn out to be needed, at least in some risk groups, it could be desirable to synchronize the vaccinations with the arrival of the cold season, similarly to what is done for influenza, so to increase the antibody response right at the time when it's mostly needed. It might be also helpful to reiterate that this issue is not strictly related to the so-called fourth dose. EMA has not yet seen data on the fourth dose, and at the moment there is no evidence from available clinical or real-life data on the need and value of a fourth dose in the general population and with the current vaccines. However, once new evidence will accumulate, we will review the data, as always, to determine if any recommendation in this respect will be warranted. In people with severely weakened immune systems, however, even though no data are yet available, it would be reasonable for public health authorities to consider the administration of a fourth dose already now. For this population, a third dose has already been approved as part of the primary vaccination series, and it would be relevant to consider a booster dose to increase the protection that can be conferred over time. In the context of wider reflections during the ICMRA workshop, regulators have also been discussing a potential update of the vaccine composition. The international scientific community and vaccine developers are encouraging to look at alternative approaches besides, for instance, an updated monovalent Omicron vaccine, which anyway remains a reasonable candidate to advance to clinical studies. In the regulator's view, companies should explore the feasibility of developing bivalent or multivalent variant vaccine to determine if they would offer advantages to monovalent vaccines in terms of ability to cross-neutralize other variants of concern. From a scientific standpoint, the studies underpinning the approval of a vaccine with a different composition will require clinical data that demonstrates an immune response measured as neutralizing antibodies that is superior to the one generated by the boosters currently available. The ability of the updated vaccine to cross-neutralize other variants of concern would be an additional feature with respect to the breadth of protection that could be provided by the updated vaccines. EMA, in its role as chair of ICMRA, underlined the need for the development of a long-term strategy on the types of vaccine needed to manage COVID-19 in the future. This is an ongoing global discussion that sits at the crossroads of science, public policy and public health, and one that will require coordination among numerous stakeholders. The decision to update the vaccines warrants collaboration among public health decision makers at all levels, including WHO. As Omicron and variant of concerns that might be emerging in the future can impact the effectiveness of monoclonal antibodies and oral antivirals, the EMA is also exploring options for collecting additional data to guide the use of these antiviral agents when different variants of concerns are in circulation and based on the expected activity. All these antiviral agents can be valuable complementary tools to tackle the virus. Together with immunomodulatory agents to be used when disease progresses, all these therapeutics provide a growing armamentarium for effectively treating patients with COVID-19. And our work does not stop here. While we are actively monitoring the wave currently ongoing, there is still an active pipeline of COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutic candidates. EMA is constantly engaging with the developers and is committed to evaluating any future marketing authorization application received in the shorter time frame possible. Before I conclude, I would like to mention the results of a detailed review of scientific studies conducted by the EMA COVID-19 Task Force, the ETF, on COVID-19 vaccination and pregnancy that have just been published on EMA's website. The review did not find any sign of an increased risk of pregnancy complications, miscarriages, preterm births, or adverse effects in the unborn babies following messenger RNA COVID-19 vaccination. Furthermore, the results show that the COVID-19 vaccines are as effective at reducing the risk of hospitalization and deaths in pregnant people as they are in non-pregnant people, with only mild or moderate side effects that match those that seen in the overall population. I will stop here and give the floor back to our moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cavalieri. We are now taking questions from the floor. So, dear colleagues from the media, as always, please turn on your cameras if you want to ask a question. And please click on the icon at the bottom of the WebEx window to raise your hand. When I give you the floor, we will unmute you and you can ask your question once your microphone has been enabled. So the first question today comes from Ludwig Berger from Reuters. Ludwig, you have the floor.
Many thanks. I wanted to follow up on Mr. Cavalieri on bivalent and multivalent vaccines. Is that a statement in favor of, or in fact, would you prefer bivalent or multivalent over single-purpose Omicron vaccines, or is that also to now go ahead and develop those, and that a Wuhan-specific or wild-type specific vaccine that we have at the moment is no longer sufficient? If you could please elaborate on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ludwig. You were breaking up a little bit. The question was about bivalent and multivalent vaccines and whether we have a preference for them over a single-purpose Omicron vaccine. Over to you, Marco.
Yeah, I think the message here and what we are hearing also from other regulatory agencies is that it's important not to exclude any options. So it would be equally important to consider not only a monovalent vaccine at this point in time, but maybe also a bivalent vaccine or even a multivalent vaccine in order to have kind of a portfolio of options that then can be taken as the basis for the decision on which vaccine to put on the market. So it's very important that we play around with different options because we want a vaccine that has as broad a coverage on variant of concern as possible. And we cannot exclude that maybe a bivalent vaccine is a more secure option, even if at this point in time we need to have clinical data to really understand that. Because at the same time, I cannot exclude that even an Omicron-only vaccine could have a good coverage for all the variants of concern that have been around so far. So it's difficult to say now and it's premature, but it's important that we look at all these options, as indeed probably it's time to think whether we should change the composition of the current vaccines.
Thank you very much. I'm now giving the floor to Susie Ring from Bloomberg. Susie, please.
Hi there. I just wondered if you could update us on the discussions you had with drug makers last week about clinical trials for multivalent vaccines or variant vaccines that might be created. EMA said that you'll be meeting with them and you're trying to coordinate a similar approach that can be applied globally for regulatory efficiency. Did you come to any conclusions about how those clinical trials should be run and ensuring that they are going to be similar between companies?
Thank you very much. This question is about the clinical trials, vaccines, and our talks with the developers. Marco, please.
Yeah, that was really a preliminary conversation around the potential design of such studies. And I think you already started in the right direction in the sense that it's pretty clear the setting where we want this new experimental vaccine to be tested. But of course, this was a first round of discussion, and after the ICMRA workshop, it will be important to come back again to the developers and to understand better what will be the final design of such clinical trials. But overall, I think there is a good understanding to start with around how to compare vaccines here, even if with respect to the definition of the primary endpoint and precisely define the population, we will need to discuss a little bit more on this.
Thank you very much. I think we now have a follow-up question from Ludwig Burger from Reuters. Ludwig, please.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Cavalieri. It sounded like you stressed, by stressing, we need to keep all options open. Have there been voices, have there been companies who have a preference to exclude certain options? Otherwise, I guess you wouldn't be saying what you said.
Marco, please.
Well, what I can say that companies study from the obvious option, which is a monovalent Omicron variant vaccine. And of course, we agree with them that that is an important option to take into account. At the same time, we would like to have more of a reflection around what else could be considered at this point in time, and that's why we would like to come back to them and to discuss also with other regulators what could be the most interesting option that maybe could be added to such a monovalent Omicron vaccine.
Thank you very much. I'm now taking a question from Victoria English from MedNew. Victoria, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'm wondering whether this move towards multi or tri or bivalent vaccines implies a certain standardization of the vaccines that you're looking for, and whether you're going to be taking more of a leadership role in perhaps directing the companies. And number two, does this suggest that any one vaccine, either messenger RNA or the other types, are better for this type of vaccine that you're talking about?
Thank you very much. Two questions, both for Dr. Cavalieri, one on the possible standardization on a vaccine and also whether one vaccine is better suited for this than any other.
Yeah, I think indeed that's why it's so important that we continue the dialogue with other regulators, but also with public health authority in Europe and beyond. And as you know, WHO has a dedicated advisory group made of scientists that are looking into what could be the best option for updating the current vaccine. So this dialogue has to continue. And of course, here we are just talking about doing some experiments with some vaccine that would be investigational at this point in time, but that could provide quite useful information around what could be the best way forward in the future. So we will continue to have this dialogue together with our partners, regulatory partners and different stakeholders, including the companies, obviously, in order to see what can be done and what could be the time frame for this collaboration. And indeed, as you say, it would be desirable that maybe we try to go all in the same direction around what kind of multivalent vaccines could be most interesting to test at this point in time. So that is definitely a work in progress.
Thank you very much. I'm now giving the floor to Virginie Baguet from APM. Virginie, please.
Hello. I would like, in France, actually, there's a delay in the availability of the Valneva vaccine. Do you have an explanation for this delay?
Apologies, we didn't understand the name of the vaccine. What kind of vaccine you're talking about?
Valneva.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Cavalieri, please.
Yeah, the Valneva indeed is undergoing rolling review, and we're waiting for some additional data. So at this point in time, I think we are continuing the work that we started, and we really hope that we will be able to progress this rolling review in the coming months and possibly coming up with an authorization not too far from now. But I cannot provide you with more details around what actually is going to happen and what will be the time frame from now.
Thank you very much. Do you have a follow-up question, Virginie? Yes, I take it. Please go ahead.
Excuse me, I made a mistake. My question was related to the Novavax vaccine and to know if you have an explanation for the delay in the availability of the vaccine, because at least in France, it's not available. It won't be available until end of February. Do you have an explanation for that? Or?
Okay, so it's about the availability of Novavax. No worries.
Okay, no, thanks. Indeed, I was not aware of delays with Valneva, so good that you reassure me on this. But going to Novavax, well, we knew that it would have taken a bit of time before batches could be delivered to Europe. So we were aware of the fact that February was a kind of an ambition time frame for shipping out batches to Europe. And that's the reason why it's taking a few more days. But our understanding for what we can say is that still this should be on track for delivery in the fourth quarter of this year.
Thank you very much. And we do not see any more questions from accredited journalists. So I'd like to close today's press briefing. Thank you very much for your participation, and also a big thank you to my colleagues who attended today. Please note that the next press briefing is the regular press briefing on COVID-19 topics will take place only in 2 weeks' time on Thursday, 3 February. And next week on Tuesday, on the 25th of January, we will hold a press briefing to inform you about the entering into effect of the EU clinical trials regulation and the launch of the clinical trials information system. So if you have any further questions or feedback, please do not hesitate to follow up with the press office at press@ema.europa.eu. Thanks again and have a nice rest of the afternoon. Bye-bye.